Okay, good morning. We've had our first complaint that we've not started on time. And sorry about that, I blame it on the previous session that ran way over time. Anyway, okay, good morning. My name is Professor William Webster. I'm chairing this panel this morning on body-worn cameras. I'm just going to do a little introduction and then we'll get on to the presentations. Okay, so this particular session, body-worn cameras and public services, we called it a new surveillance revolution. And I think the point that we're trying to make here is that body-worn cameras are emerging as a more common feature in everyday life, but we're equally starting to see them used more frequently in the realm of public services. That's particularly what this panel is interested in. We're interested in the diffusion of these sorts of equipment into public service environments. Okay, I'm the director of a research centre called CRISP, Centre for Research into Information Surveillance and Privacy. We are a research centre based across 3 different universities in the UK, the Open University, University of Stirling and University of Edinburgh. Over the last year we've been doing a bit of research on body-worn cameras, which has led us to host this panel this morning. Okay, you'll see CRISP is one of the sponsors of this event, and you'll see that one of the things that we do is we host a doctoral school every year. You'll see the leaflets dotted around. So if any of you are doctoral students, or you know of any doctoral students that want to take part in the best doctoral school for surveillance scholars, doctoral students, surveillance in the area, please pick up a leaflet and contact us. We have our next doctoral school in the spring. Okay, now we've put together a great panel this morning. We have practitioners, we have regulators, we have academics. We're trying to put together a panel which will cover different sorts of areas around the topic area. The research that we did last year at CRISP highlighted a number of things around the area of body-worn cameras. Firstly, that there was almost a silent surveillance revolution as these cameras were appearing in more and more public service environments. So we looked at police officers, we looked at traffic wardens, we looked at ticket inspectors on trains, and we also looked at community safety officers who were public safety officials that didn't have the status and the authority of police officers. What we found was a diversity in terms of the equipment used. We found a diversity in terms of the way that the data was handled and processed. We found an emerging set of new relationships between the public and the people using these body-worn cameras. So I suspect that all of those sorts of themes are the things that are going to come out from this panel. Now, I'll just introduce our speakers very quickly. I'm going to just introduce them by name and their institution. I'm going to let them say more about themselves when they get round to speaking. So just to start off then, we have Bart van der Aar, Chief Executive Officer from ZEPCAM. He's going to provide some surveillance footage from body-worn cameras when he does his presentation. We have Kishor Mistry, the Head of Policy and Support from the UK Surveillance Camera Commissioner's Office. We have Tom van der Ham, a researcher from Bureau Beke, I think that's pronounced correctly. And we have Bryce, Newell, a researcher from Tilburg University. So the idea is that we'll have a lot of different perspectives on the emergence of this new technology. Okay, the way we're going to organise the panel, speakers are going to talk for 10 minutes. They have 5 or 6 slides each. At the end of each brief presentation, I will ask for any points of clarification. So if there's anything that you didn't understand specifically, we'll field those sorts of questions then, but we're going to hold back all the discussion, all the more substantive questions until the end. And the final person that's going to contribute to this panel, of course, who I nearly forgot, was Alex Neumann, who's going to be our moderator at the other end. Okay, so that's how we're going to organise things. And on that point, let's just get started. So I'm going to hand over to Bart van der Aar, who's going to start from, he's a private company providing this sort of technology. Thank you.
Yes, all right, very good. 1 second. So my name is Bart van der Aar. I'm the founder and CEO of ZEPCAM. We're a Dutch developer manufacturer of high-end body-worn video systems. And we work especially we actually will only focus on professional users, so that's the police forces, fire departments, the industry. We have clients in about 35 countries. Most of them are, half of them in Europe, but also outside. We're market leader in Germany and the Netherlands. And today I want to show you some cases of bodycam used in different countries. I'll show you some footage, and I will not go into deep into the during my presentation into the legislation or privacy parts, but as we've been involved in numerous pilots and in rollouts, we are aware of this, and we adjust our technology to the local circumstances. So these are some clients we work for. So you can see there's quite a bit of police forces we're selling to, and what we see is that most of our sales goes through the large system integrators like Alcatel-Lucent, Cisco, Motorola. So so these are the product lines which we have. So we have two types of body-worn video systems. One is record only. That's the main goal is recording and also aggression prevention and security in general. And we have the possibility is the different product line which we have for live streaming. So we can stream the video over 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, any wireless network to a backend to the command and control room, and especially this wireless streaming technology and our end-to-end approach. So we offer officers not only buy the equipment but also the backend, and we make sure everything works. That sets us apart from most other companies in the world. And so it's so we offer the backend solutions and integrations with the existing video management system. So that's the software being used in command and control rooms. We offer this as a cloud solution and as own server solution. Cloud solution is easier and faster to deploy for clients, but most of our government type of clients they run it on their own servers for obvious reasons. So what you see here, this is the German police, which are using body cams. It's the police in the state of Hessen. It's currently the largest, has been the largest tender in Germany. They're using ZEPCAMs, and so in this case they're using a ZEPCAM body cam camera on their shoulder. And also they need to be very clear that people are being recorded. This is the Dutch police. What you see in the Netherlands is that most of the larger public events, police is now being equipped with cameras, and especially with body cams, especially the live streaming body cams. So in this case, this was the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague, where they had, in this case, the mounted police were using cameras, and then on the people who were responsible for the overall coordination and security in the area, they can have a direct view of what's going on. And it's to improve the situational awareness. So they have usually all communication is just by audio, but it's if you have a view of what's happening, then you can make better and faster decisions. Another client a group of clients we work for. That's the public safety companies. So here you can see the Danish public transport company called Movia, where they use it to prevent aggression, for their controlling people in buses. They're using a small ZEPCAM camera. It's like this one. It comes together with a recording and battery unit. And also here, what you see is that they have a clear sign which tells people that are being recorded. And so every country and every group of people, or group of users, they have their own rules for how to use it and how to be open about it to their public. This is the Dutch railways. Again, it's also for aggression prevention. There's been lately a lot of violence against the people in controlling people or conductors in trains. And wearing an invisible camera helps calm down people if things go out of hand. They can press the button and a live stream is being set up with the command and control, and they can decide how to help at that moment. It's more a private use. This is at the Tomorrowland, the largest dance festival in the world here in Belgium. And in this case, you see the security guards and the crowd control people who are among the crowd, wearing these cameras, and it's real time being broadcasted to or real time being sent to the command and control, and so they can have a much better view of the real situation and the atmosphere there. And also, for example, we had one time a case in the Netherlands where at a large event, the police were also using live stream body cams. The police officer there was an incident where somebody had a medical problem, heart problem, and the doctor who was accidentally in the command and control room could help the police person there to do first medical aid. So that's not the main reason for using it, but it sometimes can help. Then I want to show you some video footage. One sec. This. Oh yeah, this one. Okay, I'm not sure if this is too clear, but these are two Dutch bike police. So many bike police are using body cams, and many times it's being used at night. So your night view capabilities of your cameras are important. There's no incident, else I could not have shown it. Here I want to show you a different one. Is it possible to get audio here?
I'm afraid it's not.
Not okay. Then one sec. I'll just get it higher and I'll restart it. Then.
I think it's okay.
So what you see here, it's a recording of a fire department training, where they send somebody in and we're sending over 4G the real-time video, and the commander of the action has a real-time view of what's happening inside, and using his radio he can adjust them. Because the limitations of the mobile network's video is not always as clear as the recorded versions, but for an overview of what's happening and making immediate decisions, it's usually more than enough. So this is a live streaming from Schiphol, or recorded of live streaming of Schiphol. So this is the quality we can get with a decent mobile network. Many countries have this type of network now. And I think it's a good example because on an airport there are loads of fixed cameras already, but sometimes you need to have a view of for example at a gate or at an escalator to see who's coming if you're finding somebody, and then a camera on legs can be handy. And what you see here, we're streaming also over 4G with an integration with we're also sending the GPS information, so you know who is where. In this case, with an integration with Google Maps, it can be any map. And so you could even help the person, a supported person in the field, by saying, have a look at the little building on your left. And so it's just an improvement of the existing communication tools. Right, that's it. Are my 10 minutes gone?
Yes.
Over? Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you get a real sense there of some of the quality of some of the images and the different scenarios that the cameras can be used in. I've seen lots of footage of body-worn cameras, and you really get a sense of this plodding effect as people are walking around. It's never a very stable image. Okay, now we're going to move on now. We're going to talk to one of the regulators of this sort of technology in the UK. So I'm going to pass over to Kishor Mistry. He's the Head of Policy and Support at the UK Surveillance Camera Commissioner's Office.
Hi, thank you, William, for giving me the platform to talk about surveillance, regulation of surveillance in the UK, particularly body-worn video cameras. The Surveillance Camera Commissioner was a position created in legislation in the UK in 2012. Part of the reason for, if you can hear me at the back, sorry, I can't. Part of the reason for creating the legislation was an incident called Operation Champion, where a community were told that there was a surveillance camera system put up to protect them, and it was going to be outward focusing. It wasn't going to look into the community, but it was going to watch transient traffic that came in to commit crime in the community. When the cameras were switched on, the cameras were turned around and were focused on the community. And it was revealed that 95% of the budget, rather than from a crime and antisocial behaviour fund, came from a counter-terrorism budget. When the community, so it was actually spying on the community. When the community found this out, they went up in arms. It wasn't originally sold as an idea for spying on the community. It was meant to be protecting them. The system was switched off, and about £3 million of public money was wasted. So the Commissioner has been brought in to make sure that state use of surveillance initially is proportionate, transparent and effective. Sorry, I forgot to mention I haven't got any slides, so bear with me. If you've got any questions, keep them till the end and I'll answer them. So regulation is about, in the UK it's been a light touch form of regulation. There's been a code of practice that's been written, and it's encouraged, the Commissioner's role is to encourage authorities, any users of overt surveillance, to comply with that code of practice. He's developed some initial toolkits and a third-party assessment framework that allows people to say we are compliant with the code. In terms of body-worn video, the police forces in the UK have made big attempts to purchase and use the equipment. So the Metropolitan Police have just announced that they've purchased 22,000 cameras, and they're going to be the largest users of body-worn video camera in the UK. So we've engaged quite heavily with the police, so bear with me because a lot of the examples that I'll give will be examples about use with the police. Now, what we've seen from police use is that where there is best practice is good. They thought about why they want to use it. They thought about the situations in which they're going to use it. They thought about protecting the data. They thought about how the data is downloaded and how the data is used. But when you have best practice, that's great. The benchmark is worst practice, and bad practice in the to to say that I wouldn't say that I've seen worse practice, but I've seen varying practice, and varying practice that I've to a point where I've challenged the appropriateness of whether it's used in line with the code, because I don't believe it is. So what do the police use it for primarily in the UK? They use it for evidence collection. So they use it incident specific. So the footage we saw here was general surveillance. In the UK, police do not use it for that. There are local authorities, general surveillance, CCTV cameras that monitor local general surveillance. One of, incident specific is things like domestic abuse, going to a scene of domestic abuse and capturing first-hand footage. I've seen some footage in a training video, which always strikes me as useful, because when officers walk into the room, they look like two victims on the floor, one not moving, blood-stained, and one moving but blood-stained. The blood-stained victim who's moving gets up and says, and this is the value, I believe, of audio, gets up and says, he didn't give me what I wanted, so I stabbed him. Absolutely priceless footage in terms of evidence to be played in court. But without the audio, they wouldn't have captured that. And the English was slightly broken. He wasn't looking at the camera when he said that. So, in terms of, possible translation or lip reading, that wasn't a possibility in this case. But I think, it's an example of where body-worn video cameras added real value to the investigation of an incident. Interestingly, a civil liberties group, when body-worn video cameras were being touted and it being piloted, talked about whether it should be used for the integrity of policing. So police officers should have it on all the time. We argued with them and said, actually, it's not proportionate. What about private moments and private conversations? What about general public wanting to interact with the police but not wanting to be recorded? Surely it creates a barrier. Very quickly they understood that we were talking about from a very sensible point of view, where if the police objective was evidence collection, then they didn't need to be on all the time. And they're now aligned with the Commissioner's thinking on body-worn cameras. And we believe that body-worn cameras are a good thing when used well. So, in essence, they're camcorders on lapels. And I think, as a manufacturer here said, they're a growth industry. It's a massive industry that's not going to go away. We've looked at growth use on the continent. We know in the UK the forces are actively purchasing them. And in the US has been a massive procurement drive given the pronouncements from President Obama. But what were the origins of them? The origins, I believe, were ski cameras, were people wanting to record, footage of them skiing fast down slopes, and so they're available on the high street, and they're generally lower spec in terms of issues that might affect public service, like protection of data, download processes, back-end processes. So I think there's a challenge for, I think, public services to make sure that they purchase the right kit. But I think, I mean, without the advent of body-worn cameras, I just want to touch on smartphones, because I think smartphones have been are the other side, the public recording how public services use their powers in order to enforce law and order in our communities. And I think, we've all seen some really powerful footage of those cameras being used in the States, where they've challenged law enforcement agencies using cameras around how they disperse their powers. So body-worn cameras, are they helpful on the front line? Well, we hear that they're great for evidence collection, and we've seen some of that. we've seen reducing complaints. We visited a traffic enforcement department in a outer London borough where traffic enforcement officers were using body-worn video cameras. They recorded that abuse against against traffic enforcement officers had dropped 95% since they introduced the use. Now, given they're on the beat and they're subject to retaliation because they're giving out fines to people who may have other reasons for breaking parking restrictions. It's a massive win for the local authority. We know that the police in the UK are using them for recording statements. So under Police and Criminal Evidence Act, police need to take witness statements or evidence statements. Now, rather than bring somebody back to the station, they're piloting whether body-worn video cameras can be used in a quiet location where they found the person so out on the beat, rather than taking time to take them back to the office to record statements. It's a great use of and an efficient use of police time. Now, we've also been contacted by the air ambulance service who want to issue their officers with body-worn video cameras for training purposes, because it's such a critical high intensity environment that it's very difficult to train somebody on the job, so they want to use video footage in order to train them. We're working with them to make sure that that's a proportionate and a permission-based use for training videos. So it wouldn't go outside the training environment, but we wouldn't want any patient to have their details exposed without their explicit permission. I think so there is evidence that there is good use of body-worn video cameras. What I haven't seen is any academic research that reinforces that. I think lots of the examples I've given are anecdotal. But there are buts. There was the first survey into effectiveness of use by police forces looked at how good body-worn video cameras were. What they found was that lots of the devices, the batteries failed when the evidence was at a critical point. The quality of recording wasn't there. They're on lapels, so officers are moving around, and the quality wasn't good enough to capture a statement, or it wasn't clear who was saying what, or because of the positioning, it was recording up there rather than down here. So I think still in early days, but there are some lessons for use in public services. The ease of use of the devices, how easy was it to switch on? Because if it's incident specific, you will need to switch it on and off for the passage of that incident. It was, officers had been trained, but in the heat of the moment, in the incident, pressed the wrong button or didn't press it hard enough, or pressed it twice, in which case it switched on and switched off. So there are some training implications and some lessons to be learned. But the other side is it's not just about data collection, it's also about what you do with it. So we've seen some bad practice at forces where officers have to take out the SIM card, plug it into a device, download it onto their computer, delete the details on the memory card, on the SD card, put the SD card back in. I think that's a recipe for a disaster. What's there to say if there's sensitive footage that an officer doesn't want to be recorded or on the system that prevents them from exchanging the SD card, or not, saying there was a problem with the download. But then again, we've seen some really good practice where officers literally, when they come in from their duties, plug the device in for a recharge, and it automatically downloads, and it's wiped from the device. So there are varying practice. How secure is the system? Again, that first example of removing the SD card, it went into the general network of policing. So anybody could access the data, and anybody could view it, and anybody could amend it. Well, how about having, best practice on the other hand is a secure system where any access to data is fully audited, and it's linked to a case file, so it's evidence-based. Okay, sorry, I'm being told to hurry up. But the Essex trial also showed that footage may not be compatible with the CJS, and that's a big issue that needs resolving. Just one other example of bad practice, because I think the Commissioner said publicly he's concerned about proliferation and the lack of thought given to wider use. Well, we had a complaint about a licensing officer using body-worn video camera. When we contacted the local authority, the licensing officer had gone out, used kitty money to buy a device because he wanted the safety of knowing that his recording of the incident was accurate. The local authority had no processes for download, no processes or policies for data management, and rightly they suspended use of any kind of body-worn video camera until they had a data protection policy in place. I think for me one of the big issues is encryption of devices, because they're out there. They'll be used in scenarios where there are public order incidents. Officers will be involved in scuffles. If you ask any police officer if they've ever lost something, they will always say yes, because there is no doubt that officers lose things. Well, body-worn cameras are small devices that come off detached. They come off in the car, leave it in the car. What's there to say they won't be lost? So I believe that encryption is a key aspect, and that nobody should be allowed to find a device and then plug it into the system and download data, because that data, if it's evidence, is sensitive and should be used as such and should be treated as such. So what would the regulator like? An end-to-end standards framework. It's missing. Systems have been developed in an ad hoc way, but there isn't a accredited standard that says this is what we should be following. I think that would meet the need. That standard could meet the needs of data protection, could meet the needs of subject access requests, but it would also mean that the effectiveness would be raised a notch. I think there are future challenges. UK doesn't use live streaming, but I think live streaming will be a different challenge. I think automatic checking of databases, when you can take a picture of a suspect and check it against the database back at the office. I think these are challenges that we look to continue to be engaged in. That's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kishor. Before we move on, any points of clarification for our first two speakers? Not points of discussion, but points of clarification.
Kishor, just the debate you had with the civil society group on the always on question. Is there a formal document showing the Commissioner's office's viewpoint on that? Because I've not seen any formal evaluation by your office on their viewpoint that was put to that civil society group. Is there something to be done that shows?
We haven't got a document. I think it was a meeting that we had. It was an unminuted meeting. So, but it's a view that's publicly known of the Commissioner, that he believes that they should be used for evidence only collection rather than on all the time.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Actually,
Sorry, there is
statements of why rather than just a personal opinion. We might get into that.
Okay.
Into the debate, so
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask the question about whether there is.
no.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next speaker, Tom Van Ham, who's going to talk more from a researcher's perspective.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Glad you are here. I'm going to tell you something about the research my company, me and my colleagues did on body-worn camera devices. In the Netherlands, body-worn camera device used by the Dutch police. Our studies were conducted in 2010 and 2011, so it might be a little bit outdated, but I feel the dilemmas I will address are still relevant in the current context. But first, let me in on the main findings of the study. Here we are. Almost. Yes. First of all, in our studies we found that the ease of use and adequate instruction for the police officers are main determinants for successful implementation. For instance, during the pilots we found that some police forces were expanding the functionality of body-worn camera devices, and other police forces switched to other types of body-worn camera devices. On the one hand, it was for technological reasons. For instance, very big chargers that were of no use in a police setting. In Groningen, for instance, officers were walking with a backpack on their back, and that was the charger because it was so big. That is much of less relevance now because of technological developments. As Bart showed, the cameras are very little now. So that's not really a problem anymore, but it was at the time. But furthermore, we saw that police officers didn't receive adequate instruction for use of the cameras, and they wanted to use simpler devices that were easier to manage. Simply said, if officers do not know how to use the body-worn camera devices, or if they are not easy in use, they won't use them. And whatever objective you have, well, you will not accomplish that because they are not used. Furthermore, we saw positive and negative behavioral changes by citizens. We conducted a survey among about 200 people, young adolescents in the age of 15 to 80 years old, and young adults aged 19 to 24. We asked them, how would you react to body cams when officers say, well, you're being taped at the moment, which was mandatory. And I don't know if it still is, but it was back then. 80% told us, well, probably we won't change our behavior. 10% said we would be calmer. But also 8% said, well, probably I would be more provocative. And this especially goes for young male adolescents. Probably comes not as a surprise, but it's very relevant in the context of body-worn camera use, for instance, in event settings or in nightlife settings. On the basis of our findings, we found no significant decrease in violence against police officers, which was the main objective of the body-worn camera use. So back then, the Ministry of Safety and Security stopped the pilot with body-worn cameras, and they were not further used officially, although Dutch police forces have bought cameras on their own. Let's go on to the dilemmas. The first one is need to have or nice to have. I will address this by some examples. First, rapid technological developments in the cameras itself. They're smaller now, but also made them more affordable. This has led to a growing call for the use of body-worn camera devices, and as Bart showed, they're used in public transport. In the Netherlands, they're also used by food delivery services to prevent robberies, for instance. In connection with this, body-worn cameras are seen as some kind of holy grail that may solve or prevent any kind of problems, and no clear objectives are thought about. Sometimes you may say that objective may be achieved by other means. Example of nice to have. As I addressed before, the Dutch police used the body-worn cameras to prevent or reduce violence against police officers. We didn't find that evidence. A study in America did find that evidence. However, the researchers also noted a significant behavioral change in the officers' behavior. So, simply said, they behaved better because they knew they were being taped, and that possibly also led to a decrease in violence against those police officers. So, one might argue that to establish a decrease in violence against police officers, you might as well give them a training in how to approach citizens. So, I think, considering from that objective, it's nice to have. Another example where it is a need to have, I think in the current context, is that civilians, well, we probably all do have telephones which have a camera, and we are able to upload images. What we see in the Netherlands, but also for instance in America, the Ferguson riots or the Ferguson incident, is that images are being uploaded by civilians, and consequently societal unrest occurs. What happens is that civilians usually start filming in the middle of an incident. You don't know what happened before, and body-worn cameras can clarify such situations. Given that everyone is able to upload such images, I think you can say it's a need to have in the current context to manage such unrest that can result of citizens' footage. For example, when police officers actually did handle an incident well, but it's not shown on the citizens' footage. By the way, I'll go back just one more. Sometimes it's a not to have. What we did find in our research was that community officers did not want to use the body cameras, especially because they are in contact with youth groups and other people they just want to exchange information with. They noticed that they were kind of reluctant to share information because they knew they were being taped. So, considering the objectives, it could be need to have, nice to have, or sometimes not to have. Then on to the second dilemma. That is, when you use body-worn camera devices, are you filming continuously or are you filming at specific times? Particularly in the case of large-scale use of body-worn cameras, thought must be given to this dilemma. Advantages of continuous filming are that no information will be missed. You're taping continuously, so there's no risk in officers not pressing the correct button or pressing the button 2 times, and footage is not recorded. On the other hand, it requires large amounts of storage. And probably also more cameras because batteries go empty and you need to exchange them after a shift. That probably is not the case when you just tape at specific moments. For instance, when you are responding to emergency calls. Also here, given the context, you might say, I'm wanting to film continuously, for instance in event settings or nightlife settings where circumstances can change very rapidly and suddenly. On the other hand, when officers are responding to emergency settings, the 112 or the American 911 calls, you might say, well, just start taping at the moment of the incident, you have all the relevant information. Then the third dilemma, that's the processing of camera footage. It requires your back office of how you process image footage is very dependent on the objectives you're using the body-worn cameras with. For instance, when you're using it to monitor and surveillance, well, you probably don't need to store the images very long. Instead, when you are using it to identify suspects or in prosecution, you probably need to store the data for a very long time. So that requires different processes, a different back office for how to process the images. I think given everything together, the processing of body-worn cameras needs to be affordable, practical and fair, and it has to connect with the objectives of the body-worn cameras used. The dilemmas that I addressed here all connect with that, and well, it's showing that it's of mere importance to consider the objectives for body-worn camera use beforehand of just buying it. That was it.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for your excellent timekeeping. Any points of clarification for Tom before we move on? Okay, I've asked and nobody's raised a hand. Okay, let's move on to our final presentation in this session, and that's Bryce Newell, who's going to talk from an academic perspective about some research that he's done, and we will find the slides for you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I've been studying the adoption of body-worn cameras in a couple of police departments in Washington State in the United States for about the last year and a half. From the early stages of a couple of those departments adopting a pilot program and then working through pilot, and a couple of them are now moving towards a full deployment. So I think there are a couple of things I think are interesting here from the American context that I'd like to highlight, just because I think that they contrast a little bit with what's happening here in Europe. I mostly just have a couple pictures to show you here, but this is an officer from one of the departments in Washington that I've been working with, wearing the camera. You can see it sort of up on his glasses. Other officers are wearing a pack that's on their chest, and there's been a variety of different responses to the benefits of having one on your glasses. It gets more of a point of view, but it's also not as stable as the footage on the chest, but perhaps gives you a slightly better, more accurate point of view of at least where the officer's head is pointed. But I want to point out in the United States that a lot of the adoption has been very rapid recently, as already been said. It also started a bit later than it did in some places, particularly the UK, where I think body camera adoption began a number of years prior to departments in the US adopting them. And in the US, it's really exploded since, of course, Ferguson and a number of events in 2014. And a lot of the focus in the United States, at least the public-facing focus and rationale for having the cameras in many departments, is to provide transparency, is essentially to give the public the ability to conduct oversight of law enforcement conduct, right? Which then requires a level of transparency and footage delivery to the press or to the public in a way that's, I think, a bit broader than we've seen anywhere else. And I'll talk about that again in a moment. I think behind that, though, there's also a growing understanding among law enforcement, particularly in the departments I'm working with, but others in other places I've talked with from officers and others in other departments, is that the evidence collection and getting good evidence is becoming a very useful part of the program. And one of the reasons why when these departments go through a pilot or a trial of the cameras, that they are actually implementing them in the long run, because they see a lot of benefits to gathering evidence. And in particular, a number of the officers who I've been out with, I spent a lot of time in cars with officers riding around during shifts, as well as conducting surveys and so forth. And a lot of the officers who I worked with have volunteered to wear the cameras, even though some of them were critical or at least cautious about them at the beginning, but they wanted to get on the ground floor and be able to understand how to use them before they felt like it was going to go mandatory, which it is in these departments this year. And so because of this focus on transparency, we have also seen now a lot of this footage ending up on YouTube. And so it's showing up on YouTube much like citizen video is, smartphone camera footage as well. This is a bit of footage that was filmed by an officer in Bellingham, Washington during a trial of their camera, during the trial and evaluation of their cameras. A bicycle officer stopped this individual on the road. He thought he had seen a drug exchange or something like that on the street. This man started screaming and yelling at the officer, essentially accusing the officer of stopping him for racial reasons, because this man was black. And then moments into this encounter, this man takes off running, and so the camera footage documents this entire pursuit of the officer chasing this person through a field and underneath a bridge, and finally arresting the person. And interestingly, this led to a situation where the local prosecutor charged this person with a number of things, one of them being avoiding and resisting arrest, which was well documented on the footage. The individual pleaded not guilty to that, and the police department said this is ridiculous. So they sent the footage over to the defense attorney's office, and within days the man pleaded guilty and pled out, and the case was over. And so the police agency saw this as a very big win for efficiency, and the officers who were involved in this incident had a really positive evaluation of the cameras because of this, and so this led to their more formal adoption in that department. During training meetings, I thought it was interesting because a number of officers mentioned to me that the reason they wanted to wear a camera was because the citizens were filming them all the time. And one officer told me, people on the street film me every day, we should have the right to film them back, right? And a lot of them are very unhappy about some of the footage and the way the footage is edited and put up onto YouTube and so forth. And a number of them have actually seen footage of themselves on YouTube, and they know that there are certain individuals in their communities that film them all the time and always put stuff on YouTube. And so in the U.S. context, I think there's a lot of on the frontline officer level, a lot of interest in wearing one because they're already being filmed and they wanted something to document from more of their point of view. But this has led now to a situation where, especially in Washington State, but in a variety of other states, where any citizen can essentially file a public records request under the Freedom of Information law in the state and get access to virtually every recording that the police agency has. So this is much broader than, say, a subject access request you might have in the UK or Europe, where my understanding is that it's largely related to requesting footage or information about yourself. In some states, in Washington, where my work has been done, you can request basically any piece of footage that the police department has filmed, and in most cases you ought to have, under the law, you get access to it, and largely in unredacted fashion. This is an example of one of these more sensitive pieces of footage. This was requested in the first weeks of the department's camera program, and within a couple weeks after that, so within a month or two of this event and of the department starting to wear the cameras, this was on YouTube because the public, an anonymous member of the public requested this and a bunch of other footage, and pushed it all directly to an anonymous YouTube channel. This is a roughly 35-minute interview with a young woman who was arrested for prostitution, and this interview includes, this is essentially her interview with the officer that talks about her history, her family, where she's from, what sort of events led her to engaging in this sort of activity, and all of this. And it's now on YouTube, and anyone who wants to can go and watch it. And in fact, it's been watched many times. And so there's a very significant privacy issue here, I think, both in terms of officers, but in large extent, it raises questions about the privacy of any individual who happens to be captured on footage. In a number of cases, this has led officers, and particularly the officer who filmed this footage, has become very aware of this and very concerned about it. And so many of these officers who've had situations like this happen are now becoming less likely to record certain types of incidents because they know that it's likely to go to YouTube, and they don't want it to go to YouTube because they feel very badly. This officer who filmed this spent a couple hours on YouTube trying to figure out if he could actually file a takedown request based on privacy reasons because he was so upset that this footage was posted. I've talked and interviewed the person who posted this, and he's been asked by a number of people, so why don't you take it down now that you've made a point? And it's a continuing point. He's pushing for this sort of transparency and sort of pushing a dialogue, and it definitely has started a dialogue, and a number of bills, legislative bills, have been put into motion. We yet to see any actual laws come into place here that would regulate footage, but across the United States we've seen a situation where states are beginning to rapidly adopt laws that restrict access to the footage, and in many cases it's restricting a lot of, almost all, or in some cases all, access to this sort of footage, which is interesting because in the U.S. context, the initial public-facing rationale was that we're going to give you access to footage when an officer does something wrong, and that's going to give you that's going to show that we're more transparent, and it's going to allow you to conduct oversight and show that we're not actually doing what we shouldn't be doing. And if we restrict footage completely, then we're losing those benefits, and we are then in a situation where it's just being used for evidence collection and documenting witness statements, suspect statements, confessions, and so forth, which officers find it very useful for. There's some other complications that this set of variables have raised, and that is, I've been out with an officer during an arrest of an individual who was the officer knew had arrested this person many times. He was a known member of a local gang. He was also a confidential informant. And during the arrest, the officer was recording the arrest, put the person in the back seat of the car, turned his camera off, then basically got down next to the back seat of the car, and they had a conversation for 15 minutes. He then turned his camera back on, got in the front seat, and recorded the entire trip to booking at the jail, which is standard practice. The concern is, right, that he doesn't want to document information he gets from a confidential informant because it's going to cause a confidential informant to not want to speak to the police. On the other hand, if all of that footage is subject to public requests, it's fairly easy to see that there's a disconnect and there's a section missing here. And for instance, if someone feels like they've been ratted out and this information is on YouTube, it becomes fairly easy to draw inferences about what might have happened or who might have said something. And so it raises a lot of questions that would deter confidential informants from working with the police, and also potential safety risks and, for those sorts of individuals who are engaged in violent activity or involved with gangs, for instance. There's been a number of comments here about sort of whether cameras change the way the officers or citizens interact with each other. And I think this is variable, and I think officers I've seen people mostly just, when they've been told that an officer's wearing a camera, they sort of just nod and say, oh, that's okay, and they almost don't seem to register the fact that it's happening, that they're being recorded. Some officers have told me that they feel like people have actually changed behavior, in some cases stopped screaming at an officer and actually started saying, oh, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, those sorts of things, because they realize all of a sudden they're on camera. But I think that that's not really necessarily pervasive in the departments I've seen. Officers have, in many cases, told me that they feel like they've stopped swearing and using profanity as often, and because it's against department policy, and they could get disciplined for it if a supervisor happens to watch the footage and decides it was out of line. So that's some sort of calming effect on officer behavior. Other officers, interestingly, have taken it upon themselves to watch their footage, in some cases immediately following an incident, in order to essentially self-critique their conduct, and officers have made changes to the way they approach citizens based on what they're seeing on their footage. But this is also complicated by a big discussion in the United States now about whether or not officers ought to have access to their footage prior to writing a report about an incident, particularly in situations where there's use of force or something else of significance has occurred. But in many cases, the officers, some officers like to watch it immediately. In most cases, officers are not frequently watching their footage, although they will if they're, for instance, documenting a witness statement or a confession, because they want to get the words just right. Because the risk here is, if we don't allow officers then to watch their footage prior to writing a report, and then they're called to court to testify on the stand, they want to make sure that their statement matches up exactly. And even if the general sentiment is the same, they want to make sure that their words are the same, because they have experience with public defenders sort of really latching on to any sort of inconsistencies in their statements. And so there's also some tensions here that officers are quite concerned about.
1 minute if you need it.
I will just close by saying I've also seen, over the course of about last year and a half with these officers, some officers, and it's been very broad, some officers have actually become much more comfortable with the cameras. Most of them report higher levels of satisfaction and acceptance of the cameras, and many of them use them quite frequently. I've also seen, especially in a department where policies about when to record are less strict, that many officers are recording less and less frequently over time, partly because of public disclosure issues and not wanting to record certain types of incidents, but partly just because they really only want to record what they think is going to be useful for evidence, and if it's not going to be useful for evidence, they don't see as much reason for doing it if they're not being required to. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Any points of clarification before we move on? No, great. I'm going to pass over now to Alex Neumann, who's going to moderate the discussion. And we have until 11:45.
Yeah. I would have a couple of points of clarification from myself, but I would like to give you first the chance to ask any of our four speakers. Otherwise, I will start with some technical questions for Bart and then some for Tom. But first, are there any questions you like to raise? Yeah, Ivan, please.
Maybe, yeah, thank you. Two questions to Bart.
Okay.
One is a factual question. Where is the ZEPCAM cloud operating? In the Netherlands, or maybe outside the EU, or it's up
No,
in
it's,
Brian?
the cloud is operating in the Netherlands. But we have actually what we see is that most of our government type of clients, they're using our own service solution, and then they're running it in their own network for very obvious reasons.
Thank you. And the other question is, we see that you produce really high quality tools for recording and transmitting what's happening on the streets or wherever, and you leave the question of use to your clients. Can you use the principle of privacy by design in your work? For example, providing some access control tools or whatever, or you prefer pushing this part of the game to the client? How to use it, how to apply privacy?
Yeah. No, actually, we design it very much with privacy and data security within the technology. But if clients want to adjust it for their own for own situation, we can help them with it. But to give you an example, for example, with all our data is locally stored on devices encrypted. We have so if you find that you cannot get to it unless you're very smart, so we use an AES 128 encryption, and we're moving to 256. We have different levels of authority. So you have user, super user, and administrator, and that's so that you have more or less rights for accessing the video or deleting it. For example, a privacy issue with the live streaming is that because it is possible technically to start the streaming remotely, because that's the technology allows that. In some cases, it's also clients want that, but it's as soon as the video starts transmitting, and if it's done by yourself or by somebody else, the LEDs start blinking and you get an audio feedback. And as a user in the field, you can always overrun this the transmission, because if you're else people will not many people will not start using it. But to give you an example of how we adjust sometimes our functionalities to local situations, in the German police, especially the state of Hessen, they're pioneers in using body cams. In the beginning, when they started the pilot, they were only allowed by law to record video and not audio. But they realized, and that's also what you were mentioning, that many times evidence is also in the audio, but legislation did not allow it, so we disabled this functionality. They were not able to record the audio. Later on, they changed the law, and then it has been enabled. But that's how our approach is.
Okay. Michael Lagenborg, and then a second question.
Okay, thank you. So actually this now turns out to be a follow-up question to what Ivan just asked, and I will put the question to Kishor, because you brought up the point that there seems to be a disconnect between the academic world and the world of practitioners. So you rightfully brought to the table that academics do not catch up with the current use of body-worn cameras, a lot of examples are missing, and a lot of potential use scenarios are missing. But if I look at the list of things that could be improved, that looks to me like a privacy by design 101. So very basic considerations that are under discussion in the academic world for years now. So there seems to be the disconnect between academics and practitioners seems to go in both directions. My question is, would you subscribe to this observation, and do you have any ideas how to overcome that disconnect? Thank you.
It's a very good question. One thing I just discussed with William outside of this meeting was bringing him onto a working group looking at developing a national strategy for overt surveillance in the UK. Because the Commissioner wants to work with academia and understand how to incorporate academia into work with practitioners on developing a proper regulation of surveillance in the UK. So it's a conversation that me and William will continue to have outside of this meeting.
Okay. I think, Bryce, you want to add something on?
Yeah, I just want to make a brief point about the privacy design questions, because I've done a number of interviews with developers at another manufacturer of these, and I've asked them questions about how human values get embedded into the design practices. And it's interesting because I'll give two very quick examples. But the trend is, and I think it makes sense why this is happening, but it's incorporating values of the end users, right? So the people who are actually going to be using the cameras, because it's a product that's going to market. But one instance is sort of the pre-buffer, the pre-record buffer, which most of these systems have now, essentially is recording all the time. You activate it, it automatically records and saves a minute or a couple minutes or 30 seconds of recording prior to when you actually initiate the recording. And this manufacturer had removed the audio, and many may have done that, but they removed audio based on feedback from law enforcement officers that 30 seconds before they pressed the button, they might have been engaged in a conversation with their partner, or they might have been making a personal phone call, or a variety of other things. They didn't want that part of the recording, so audio has been stripped out. The other was that the cameras were initially created with a forward-facing light, to indicate to individuals in the public that they were being recorded. But that light's been taken off and moved to the back because of officer safety concerns, because they were concerned that at night, in a tactical situation, it would show off their location, and they didn't want that. So this is embedding values in a certain way, but it's been driven by the end user, which makes sense in sort of the marketplace that these companies are working in.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. First one over here.
Very brief. I was wondering about the reaction of police officer trade unions, because if I try to imagine the implementation in my country, which is Italy, I can imagine an endless discussion with trade unions and workers' rights, like the rights of police officer as workers.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I think Washington State is a unionized state, so law enforcement are unionized.
Next session has to start in 7 minutes.
We managed that.
Okay, I'll say this very, very quickly. And I think the largest contribution that unions have made in Washington State in these agencies is working with the departments to create detailed policies prior to the actual deployment of the cameras. And so in some cases, Spokane, for instance, this took at least a year, sort of back and forth between the unions and the departments in order to get policies into a place where the unions were okay to sign off with this, and then they could then adjust the officer contracts in order to require them to wear cameras. So it took a long process, but they generally have been on board. They just wanted policies in place, which, at least for that, has been very positive, I think.
No,
Okay, then there was second question in the back, and then it's you, and then it's you.
Just a quick one. Pete Fussy from the University of Essex in the UK. Just a quick question for Kishor. I'm interested in where you see the public-private division with a lot of these things. I mean, so there's research in Australia where police officers have bought off-the-shelf private body-worn camera kits, so they're seen as a private, even though they're using a public service, they own the kit. So it's immune from freedom of information, for instance. But the Protection of Freedoms Act, which created your office, was ostensibly focused on public actors or public servants or public sector agencies. Where do you see the issues for things like, say, private security guards using body-worn cameras but using them to survey public space, for instance? What are the kind of regulatory issues there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because Protection of Freedoms Act was interpreted as relevant authorities, which was state surveillance, but it also encouraged the Commissioner to work with voluntary adoption. So the Commissioner's reading of it is about all overt surveillance, and the strategy that he wants to put together that I'm engaging William on is about looking at all overt surveillance. Does that help?
So that covers private.
Yeah. So covering private, all use of overt surveillance, whether it's private or public. But the key bit will be in public space.
My question is to Bart. You mentioned that your system is based on the levels of users. So to authorize user roles and permission, which access control policies your system rely on?
So the user explain that's the part. So the user is able to record a video and replay it on the screen of the device. He's not able to take it off the camera. The super user has the same rights, but he can take it off the camera, and he's able to delete it. And then you've got the administrator who has rights for having more people giving access to the system and changing date and time. But even so, that's the standard. So that's the standard rights which we have. But we can, as an organization, you can design it, or change the settings as fit your situation.
Yeah, you have a specific model language or?
Sorry?
You have a specific model like ARBAC, which system of access control?
No, I need to ask, but it doesn't. I'm not sure. Yeah.
You have another one?
Just a final or a small remark. What was interesting, I thought, was in all the presentations talk about the user and the end user, and I think what we see in such scenarios is that what Tom also pointed out is that it really depends on the context, and the type of users really are different there. But also I was wondering, in Bryce's example, the end user is also a citizen who gets the footage and puts it on YouTube. So where do we put the boundaries of this end user definition, and how can we design for that? That's I think a challenge as well. But it's just an observation. User is not only the police officer, but it goes beyond that.
Have we run out of time?
Would we allow a last question?
One last question,
One
if it's
last
short.
question.
2 sentences.
Okay, great.
We need to stop talking about users, and you're right, the users tend to be the ones pushing these rules and regulations, etc. We need to evolve a stakeholder approach, which I think the Stones Commission, Stones Commission's office in the UK is now beginning to move towards more, from what I've seen as their statements. But that's what we need to do. At the moment, the users have way too much power, and other stakeholders are very, very powerless.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I guess most of you will have realised that we are all under surveillance, not a body-worn camera, but there's a big camera at the back there. This panel will appear on CPDP TV in a few weeks' time, so you'll be able to recall it, have a look at what was discussed and what was presented. A wide range of issues covered. This area is ripe for academic research and also new regulatory activity. If you need access to any of the slides or want contact details of any of the speakers, please contact me and I can provide those. So let's thank all our speakers for their contributions this morning.